All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this month's edition of the Cyber Showcase. As always, I am your host, Brett Rock, and I'm a sales manager here with SBS. I'm going to be flying solo for the most part this month, so you'll get more of me than you usually get, so I apologize in advance there. But I am joined by our content strategist, Lindsay Hull, who will be handling our marketing quarter as usual. Lindsay, you want to say hello?
Hey everyone, it's great to be back.
Yep, had some technical difficulties last time around, but I think we've got those solved, thankfully. So she'll be here to cover all the good stuff that we're doing this month. Also, today's topic is one we haven't covered in a while, so I thought it would be a good chance to talk about the importance of all the different pieces of your information security program playing together to give you a full picture of what your risk looks like and the benefits of using a GRC tool like our TRAC product to help you do that. So we're going to talk a lot about kind of the benefits of that, the benefits of it all playing together, the ability to have data to drive decision making and things like that. So excited to kind of go back to my roots a little bit here and talk about TRAC and some of the different moving pieces there. From an agenda perspective, as always, you've got Lindsay and my contact information over there on the left-hand side. If you're ever interested in anything we can do to help out or you want to get more information, please feel free to reach out to either of us. We're doing introductions as we speak. I will be turning it over to Lindsay to handle our marketing corner here in just a moment. And then we're going to dive into today's topic, talking about building the puzzle of your information security program, connecting the pieces, having the right tools to do the trick, using data to drive those decisions. And then we're going to jump into TRAC itself and drive around a little bit and look at how all those things work together. So with that, Lindsay, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you to cover some of the different content we've got and some of our upcoming webinars.
Yeah, we have just a couple of blogs we wanted to highlight for today's session. Since we're focusing on unifying your ISP through TRAC, we have a couple that will support that shift. So first up, we have Streamline IT Risk Assessments with TRAC, written by our own Brett Rock. So if you're still managing risk in spreadsheets, this blog explains the limitations and how TRAC can simplify the process while providing real-time visibility, which you'll see today. It's a great companion piece to this conversation. And then we also have testing a business continuity plan for essential steps. Since business continuity is one of those core pillars we're talking about today, this blog will help walk through how tabletop, limited scale, and full scale exercises will help validate your plan, expose gaps, and strengthen your continuity over time. So hopefully those will provide some great context. And then I also want to give a heads up about Converge. So our first annual Cyber and AI conference is coming up this October. We're really excited about it. And we wanted to let you know that early bird pricing ends tomorrow, Friday the 15th. So you can save $100 off the list price. And we also wanted to share that SBS clients can save an additional $100 on top of that pricing with the promo code CLIENT100. So definitely would love to see you guys there this October.
Yeah, we had a quick conversation at the top of the last Cyber Showcase to introduce Converge. I know internally we're very excited. Registrations are already going on. I think we've got quite a few people already signed up for that. We're really excited about it, and more scheduling, more content to come. And if you go to that website there at the bottom, converge.sbscyber.com, that landing page, that'll take you to more information there as well. Sorry, Lindsay, just wanted to jump in with that piece. Here you go.
Absolutely. So we also have some great things coming up on the education side. Next week on May 20th, Will Keller and Hunter Cockrell will show you how to think like an attacker to uncover hidden weaknesses. And they'll also walk through how purple and red teaming can help you move from reacting to incidents to anticipating them and strengthen your overall cyber posture. And then on May 27th, we have our monthly hacker hour. Our president, John Waldman, will be joined by Chad Greenway, an 11-year NFL veteran and former Minnesota Vikings captain. They'll talk about how the trust, accountability, and communication that win in the locker room are the same skills that build credibility in the boardroom. So that should be a really fun conversation. And then finally, on June 3rd, Hunter Cockrell will be back to lead a hot topic webinar for the SBS Institute on how modern AI models, including agentic and reasoning-driven systems, are starting to behave less like tools and more like teammates. So we'll also talk about why that shift matters for security teams and how governance and safe adoption can be prioritized.
Yeah,
So
that'll
we'd
be a
love
good one
to
as
see you
well.
there.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, thank you, Lindsay. A lot of great stuff from us as usual. And if you go to our website at www.sbscyber.com, you can see our events page with all our great content that's coming up. Probably should have mentioned this at the outset. You'd think I'd be better at this by now, but if you do have any questions, go ahead and throw those in the chat or in the Q&A box. I'll try to answer those at the end. But if you do want a copy of the slide deck, which has hot links to all these different topic areas, as well as the blog postings we discussed earlier. That is part of the survey. So if you don't mind taking that survey, that'll be helpful for us as well. All right. So with that said, let's jump into today's main area of conversation, which is kind of building the information security program puzzle. So again, this is a topic that we've had conversations about for a long time. I'm sure all of you are doing these different pieces: vendor management, risk assessments, business continuity management. Maybe some of them some of you are doing in TRAC already, which we greatly appreciate. But we just want to have a conversation. I'm going to talk to you today about what all those different pieces are, how bringing them together to make sure that they're all working in harmony with one another can really be beneficial. Talk about how you can get data out of that information to drive better decision making. And then again, we will jump into TRAC itself here toward the end, where we can walk through and kind of show you how those different pieces all come together in our TRAC tool. Again, there are other tools out there that do something very similar. But the biggest thing here is, you can't get good decisions without good data, and you can't get good data without the right tools. And if you're using spreadsheets where things are scattered across different areas, you're probably not using the right tool to get that information. So this is kind of the foundation. And everything we're going to talk about today kind of comes back to one central idea, that this is kind of a puzzle: information security. It's having all these disparate pieces all over the place that we're pulling together to really give us a better understanding of our risk as a whole. So that's really going to be, at the end of the day, what we're trying to get at. So, information security as a puzzle, we all have the individual pieces. You're doing risk assessments, you're doing business continuity management, you're doing vendor management, you're probably doing an organization-wide risk assessment. You've got policies and procedures. We all have the individual pieces, but they don't really tell you anything on your own, right? If you're building a puzzle, picking up and looking at one puzzle piece isn't going to tell you what the whole looks like. Having all the pieces playing together when the puzzle is finally built is really what gives you that overall risk picture that really can help you make better decisions, understand where your risks are, and things like that. So again, most organizations and institutions are doing the work. They have a vendor list somewhere. They've done a risk assessment. They have business continuity program documentation. The problem isn't necessarily effort, it's connection. It's individual pieces that are sitting in separate places and that are managed by separate people on separate timelines. When that's the case, you don't get a picture of your risk overall, just like you wouldn't get a picture of what the puzzle is meant to be if you did it that way. You get a pile of pieces. And in this industry, a pile like that can get exploited. And hopefully nobody's ever experienced that. But that's really what we're getting at the end of the day. Having that full understanding of what your risk looks like and where the gaps are and what you need to do to get better is really the only way to make sure that you're safe and secure going forward. So what are the pieces? There's really 5 core components I want to talk about today. I put them on the screen there: IT risk assessment, organizational risk assessment, business continuity management, vendor management, and then kind of a 5th piece, information security program, which kind of means a lot of different things. It encompasses all the different pieces that we've talked about. But really what I'm getting at when I say information security program, and what you're going to see when we get into TRAC, is more dealing with the concept of policies and procedures. So how are we governed? How are all the different things, all the different moving parts of our information security program governed by policies and procedures? Do those match best practices? Do they match our size and complexity? Things like that. So these are the 5 components we're going to talk about today, although there are probably other areas that you're risk assessing things and all kinds of stuff like that as well. But before we get into kind of why it's important that they work together, I kind of want to go through what these pieces are. And again, I'm sure you're all familiar with them, but just to kind of make sure that we're getting it all out on the table, it all kind of does start with an organization-wide risk assessment, which is a risk assessment typically of your information security program as a whole. And that's usually done against a specific framework. So whether that's, in the past, it was the cyber assessment tool, the CAT. Now you're probably looking at CIS or NIST or the CRI profile. Lots of different ways you can do that. But this is really your 30,000 foot view. How does your information security program stack up against an established framework? How does it stack up against other institutions or organizations? Comparison data, things like that. This is your baseline before anything else occurs. So this is kind of that real high level overview of what we're doing, how effectively we're doing it. It's kind of generally anecdotal. It's not necessarily as quantitative as we get in some of the other risk assessments that we're going to do. It's more qualitative based off of conversations and intuition and instinct and experience and things like that. But it is very important because it does give you an idea of how you stand measured against a specific framework, potentially, as I've mentioned, like NIST or CRI or something like that. The second piece of the puzzle is IT risk assessment. And this is actually what we consider to be the backbone of our TRAC tool and kind of the backbone of your information security program. But this is a risk assessment of your IT assets, anything that stores, transmits, or processes data. So this is where we start to get specific, right? Every asset that stores, transmits, or processes data is in scope for an IT risk assessment. And what we do there, and what you'll see as we get into it in a little bit, is we measure that risk by identifying how critical the asset is. We do that with what we call a protection profile, where we look at confidentiality, integrity, availability, and volume. We identify the threats that could occur to each of our individual assets, the impact and the probability of those threats occurring. We review the controls we have in place to mitigate those threats. And at the end of the day, we're able to understand where our gaps are, where our strengths are, where our weaknesses are, our inherent risk score, what we look like with no controls, and our residual risk score, which tells us with the controls we have in place, how much risk are we actually mitigating. So your IT risk assessment to us is really kind of the most important thing, because a lot of the decisions that we're going to talk about a little bit later on are going to come back to what your IT risk assessment looks like. The information security program, again, in this case, what I'm more specifically talking about are the policies, procedures, and other documentation that govern how your institution or organization both manages and protects information and technology. So this is the governing layer. All those policies, all those procedures, all those things that everybody loves writing, these are the rules that your organization or institution has set for how you manage and protect information. So that's kind of what we're getting at there. And you'll see how that plays into all the other things in just a little bit. Vendor management, pretty simple here. That's the management of your third parties and occasionally fourth party vendors. Obviously, third parties extend your risk surface, whether you're managing them or not. The risk is going to be there. It doesn't really matter if you're doing an effective job managing it or not. But this is how you track, review, hold them accountable, and really understand where the risks are as well when it comes to vendors overall. And you're going to, again, see how that plays with everything else. And then the final piece that we talked about is business continuity management. So this would be the management of all the processes and all the systems that allow your institution or organization to remain operational, or how we restore operations in the event of some sort of disruption, whether that's a man-made or natural disaster. So what happens when something goes wrong? How do you stay operational or get back up to being operational when a disruption occurs? So those are all the different pieces. If we're, again, kind of going back to the puzzle mindset, these are all the different pieces that we're going to take to put together to get a really good understanding of what our information security program looks like overall. So now that we've kind of identified the pieces, and definitions are certainly useful, but knowing what each piece does doesn't really tell you how they all work together, or frankly, what happens when they don't. So that's really where I want to shift right now into connecting the pieces. So when it comes to your IT risk assessment, it actually connects in a bunch of different ways, but the two that I want to highlight today are the fact that your IT risk assessment has to flow into your business continuity management program, and it has to flow into your vendor management as well. So, from a BCP's perspective, we have to understand which assets are most critical to support the processes and functions that we have. If we're not doing that, and we're trying to do a business impact analysis, for instance, and we're not accounting for the assets or systems that we would need to have in place for it to be operating, or the ones we would need to get it back up and running again if that function were to fail, we're not going to get a very accurate BIA. Similarly, when it comes to vendor management, if you're reviewing the risk of your vendors, but you don't know how risky the stuff is you get from your vendors, that's not going to help you really get a clear understanding of what your vendor risk looks like either. So that's kind of where those kind of start to play hand in hand. We understand by the IT risk assessment how risky all the stuff, the asset, the service, the solution, whatever it might be that you're getting from your vendor, then can flow into your vendor management program to really give you a much more complete understanding of how risky each individual vendor is. Vendor management also plays into business continuity as well, for a lot of the same reason that your IT risk assessment does. If you are not understanding, or if you're not able to understand and articulate clearly which vendors are most critical to your business continuity functions and services and things like that, then you're not going to be able to get back up and running in the best possible way. So again, all of this is meant to play together so that you can get a really clear understanding, in particular when it comes to business continuity, of how we need to get back up and running. Who do we need to talk to? What services do we need to restore first? Those are all things that, if this is playing together, will help you understand. And then finally, all three of those things do factor into your organizational risk assessment. So again, something like the CRI profile, or the NIST CSF framework, or the CIS benchmarks, or in the past, the CAT. All of those different things kind of play into that, right? We're going to use the information that we have from those three pieces to really be able to complete an effective organizational risk assessment at the end of the day. So why do they need to connect? We talked about some of this already, but you can't really know the full risk of a vendor if you don't know how risky the stuff is you get from them, right? If we're only looking at the vendor itself, but we're not looking at the product, the service, the solution, whatever it is that we get from them, to risk assess that as well, then we're not going to know how risky the vendor is either. We can't build an accurate BIA, business impact analysis, without knowing how critical each asset or vendor is to get back up and running. We need to know, again, what we need to restore, who we need to talk to. All those different sorts of things are going to factor into giving you a more accurate BIA. Your policies and procedures are only as good as the risk assessments that are informing them, right? So if we're not doing good risk assessment work or good business continuity work, we can't really get good policies and procedures to help us understand how to govern that stuff going forward. You can't have a full picture of your organizational risk without having all of those things working together as well. So the question isn't really whether these connections matter. We know they matter. The question is whether your current tools and the current processes and functions that you're using to do them can actually support putting all of this together as well. So that's really where we get into choosing the right tools, right? So this is where organizations, we find, have the biggest gap. It's not in understanding that risk matters. It's not in having, not doing these things. Certainly, we know you're doing them for the most part, hopefully, but it's in having the right infrastructure to manage it effectively and to have it all work together. So a lot of people, in our experience, even today, are still using spreadsheets for risk management. Now, let's be clear. I'm not criticizing spreadsheets. That's not what I'm doing. They're flexible, they're familiar, they're affordable, obviously, and they're genuinely useful for a variety of tasks, right? If you're tracking a budget, if you're building a model or organizing data, a spreadsheet can really be valuable for those purposes. The problem isn't that spreadsheets exist. The problem is that what we ask them to do next, right? So how do we take something that's in a spreadsheet that's really just there to collect data and then start to use that to drive some of the things we have to do from a risk management perspective? That's where we kind of fall into some of the issues. So spreadsheets are great for a lot of things. Risk management is just not one of those things. So risk management rather isn't a data organization problem. It's a decision problem. It's a process problem. It's a people problem. And spreadsheets just were never designed for any of those things, right? They were designed to store and calculate data, do formulas, all those different sorts of things, and they do a great job with that. But really, when we try to get outside that and start to do some of the things we have to do from a risk management perspective, that's where some of those gaps come into play. And I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir on some of this stuff, but for people that are using spreadsheets or have in the past, I'm sure you're familiar with some of the problems that we typically run into. The biggest one, or one of the bigger ones, being you have to create them yourself. It's a blank page. You have to create the framework. They're your definitions. They're your rating scales. They're your formulas and calculations. And you have to come up with the data, the threats, the controls, All those different sorts of things you have to do on your own if you're using a spreadsheet. And every organization is kind of reinventing the wheel all on their own when they're using a spreadsheet for this sort of thing. You also have to manage them yourself, right? There's no workflows, there's no automation that's pre-built in, there's no alerting that's built in. Really, it only ever moves and changes when somebody actually goes in and manipulates it, which brings up another problem, version control. How do we make sure that everybody has the same spreadsheet? It's the same up-to-date one. It's everybody's accessing it correctly. And we're making sure that if I make changes here, everybody else is getting them. Which file's current? Who made the last change? The answer, unfortunately, is I think it's this one in a lot of cases, or this is the one I've got, so that's what I'm going to operate off of. But version control can be very challenging when it comes to risk management and spreadsheets. Data security is another issue, right? So access is typically all or nothing to a spreadsheet. There's very little way to say, I'm going to give so-and-so access to just this cell or this column or something like that. Everybody who can open the file can generally see it and edit most things, right? So, obviously you can share it so that's not editable, but even that tends to cause more problems than it's worth in a lot of cases. Consistency is a big problem when it comes to spreadsheets. There's nothing there to enforce how data is entered, rated, interpreted, and over time that can drift, right? Especially when you're doing multiple types of risk assessments in spreadsheets, right? We do our IT risk assessment, but we also do an enterprise risk assessment or a compliance risk assessment or a Bank Secrecy Act risk assessment. Those are all different types of risk assessments that, if driven by different people using different spreadsheets, can really cause a lot of havoc because we don't have that consistency across the board. I'm sure everybody's struggled at times pulling reports out of spreadsheets. Again, they're great for putting data in, but if you ever want to try to get the data out in terms of having something useful to be able to drive better decision making, that can mean hours of manual work, right? Every single time. So lack of great reporting, lack of dynamism. It's a snapshot. The moment you close it, that data starts to go stale, right? Unless we're updating those threats constantly or those controls constantly. So again, the lack of dynamism can cause problems. And then finally, it's maybe not scalable is a little bit too far when it comes to a spreadsheet, but certainly it's less scalable than some of the tools that we're going to show you here in a little bit. It might work okay with 10 or 15 vendors, but does it work great with 80 to 100 vendors? If you're risk assessing 15 assets, maybe it works, but as you get upwards of 80 to 90 assets, some of that can be more challenging. So the scalability can be a problem. But the biggest reasons to me are things like simple errors, right? A 2024 study that I was reading from the Frontiers of Computer Science said that 94% of spreadsheets used in business decision making contain errors. And it's not malicious errors. More often than not, it's just kind of simple, I accidentally typed this in one spot and now it's wrong everywhere. You may remember back in 2012, JP Morgan Chase lost $6.2 billion after errors were found in a risk model that they had built in copy and pasted spreadsheets. And after that investigation was completed, it boiled down to the spreadsheet was dividing by the sum of two values instead of their average. So again, that's not a malicious thing. It's just a kind of a small mistake that has some pretty significant consequences. Citigroup wired $900 million to the wrong people because of manual input mistakes in spreadsheets. So again, these things can be just little simple, I accidentally typed something wrong in one spot, or I built the formula wrong, and suddenly we're talking about pretty significant issues that spur from that. Another reason is that it creates silos. And this is kind of the one that goes back to our puzzle kind of concept, right? If IT risk lives in one file and vendor management lives in another and business continuity is in a Word document somewhere, they're not talking to one another. They're not integrating. They're not flowing together. You're not getting your information moving from one spot to another in the same ecosystem so that they're giving you the information you need to drive better decision making. We talk a lot about kind of singing off the same sheet of music, right? If everybody's got a different sheet of music and everybody's singing at the exact same time, it's probably not going to be a very great song. Having everybody singing off the same sheet of music, having all this stuff work together gives you the best opportunity, not to butcher that metaphor too much, but to have all of it sounding pretty good at the end of the day. And then the big reason number three is they drive compliance in a lot of ways, but not decision making, right? So There's a difference between managing risk and documenting that you've managed risk. Spreadsheets are very good at documenting about, okay, here's all our data in one spot, right? It can be, filed, formatted, printed, all that stuff is great, but really does it help you drive any decision making? Does it help you understand where your gaps are and what you need to do to get better and how you might do that? In most cases, the answer is no. So again, another big reason why spreadsheets aren't necessarily built for risk management is that they're great at documenting things, but they're not great at helping you drive decisions. So platforms like TRAC, GRC platforms, obviously come with a lot of benefits, assessment workflows and content that are developed and maintained by experts. Obviously, there are other tools out there, so I can only really speak about TRAC, but we spend about 1,100 hours annually just making sure the content in TRAC is ready for you to use on a regular basis. So we are, that's 1,100 hours you're not having to spend coming up with all the data that you're going to see when we start going through it. Data security, right? Role-based access, controlled permissions. It's not the all or nothing thing that comes with spreadsheets. Brings consistency. The framework is the framework. The workflows are the workflows. The data stays comparable. If we're doing multiple risk assessments using the same exact formulas and workflows, that's going to give us the ability to really compare apples to apples, even across risk assessments. Reporting is a big feature of these platforms. On-demand, board-ready reporting that you can hand to anybody that needs to see it to demonstrate, here's my risk assessments, here's our vendor management program, all those sorts of things. They're dynamic. The program stays current. Again, I mentioned that the 1,100 hours number there. This isn't something where a tool like TRAC is just standing still. We are constantly updating it and making sure that you've got everything you need to do the work that you're doing. And then it is scalable, right? It grows without breaking. It's built to have a ton of data in it. That's how these are created. But just to kind of get at some of the other big reasons, they are designed specifically for risk management. They're not adopted from a general purpose tool. It was built for this work. The frameworks, the control sets, the assessment content, all that is built into the tool specifically for the purpose of doing risk management. So when you look at our IT risk module in a few minutes, it's not going to be a spreadsheet that we're using for IT risk assessments. It's an IT risk assessment module built to perform IT risk assessments, and that can make a pretty big difference. The second big reason is integration. Again, all of it playing off the same sheet of music. This is what makes everything else possible. So when your IT risk assessment, your vendor management, your business continuity management, all that stuff is living in the same platform with the same data structure, and they're actually talking to one another, we can have all that stuff playing together. We can have our IT assets flow directly into our vendor management profile so we can understand how risky the vendor is overall. We can have that work into our business continuity program so that we can get an accurate business impact analysis. So all those connections that we talked about earlier that are so important, they happen here in TRAC or in a tool like this. That's what that integration means. And you'll see how it can really drive better decisions, which is our last point. It helps with compliance and data-driven decisions. So this is not an either-or thing. This doesn't have to be, well, we're doing compliance or we're using data to drive better decision-making, because when your program is running the right way, all of it's working together so that you can demonstrate compliance and you can use the data to drive better decision-making going forward. So that's what we're trying to do here with our tool and certainly the other tools in the marketplace. So before we jump into TRAC, I do want to just get into kind of why having good data to drive those decisions really matters. Again, I'm sure you're familiar with a lot of this, but really, what other areas of a financial institution would you ever make decisions based off of incomplete information, right? You would never offer a loan to somebody if you weren't getting all of the information you needed to make the best decisions possible, right? Sometimes we see that with information security, right? If we're having all these different spreadsheets and we're just using them for compliance purposes and we don't really know what they mean, we're kind of making decisions blind sometimes. Having all that information at your fingertips can really help you make the best decisions with what is more often than not limited resources. So all of this leads to this, right? How do we connect all those pieces? How do we make sure it's all in one spot so that we can get the information we need to make the best decisions possible? So what decisions are we talking about, or what questions can we answer? What are your riskiest assets, right? So we're not guessing at this. We understand based off the controls we have in place and the threats and the probability of those threats occurring, which assets do we have to be most concerned about? where do we need to add some additional controls? Who are our riskiest vendors, right? Intuitively, you might just pick a vendor and say, okay, well, this one's got to be the riskiest because they're the most critical to us. And maybe they are. Or maybe you have a ton of great controls in place and you're confident in that vendor and you know that they're handling your information appropriately and you're managing them correctly. So maybe they aren't your most risky vendor, right? Maybe somebody else is and you just don't know it until you see it in a tool like TRAC. Which business processes are most critical to your operations? So when it comes to business continuity, how do we know which ones are most important? If everything fails at once, how do we get back up and running again? What order do we go in? Which threat should be your biggest concern? Which controls are worth implementing? What do we need to train employees about and customers? Now, all that comes back to a risk assessment. If we understand what threats we need to worry about, then we can start to train our employees a little bit more effectively. We can target those areas that are most concerning. About our customers, right? If we're offering all kinds of different services and solutions to them, what do we need to be talking to them about? What threats are out there that we need to be most concerned about? Do we have the right policies and procedures that not only meet compliance regulations, but also meet our size and complexity and best practices and things like that? So are they meeting best practices? Are they meeting your size and complexity? How do you measure up against some common frameworks that have really laid out what good information security looks like? All of these questions can be answered with a good information security program that is working together. So really, a good information security program gives you confidence to know where your risks are, who owns those risks, what can be done to address them. So again, a tool like ours that we'll get into here in a second, we can not only help you understand where your gaps are, but really what might you do to get those resolved. How are your vendors performing against your standards? What happens if a critical system or vendor fails? Those are all things, questions, or I guess areas where we can give you confidence in answering. So you can have answers that you're willing to stand behind at the end of the day. Having the data can drive all of that and can really help you feel comfortable and confident when it comes to an exam, when it comes to an incident, whatever the case may be. You've got it all working together so that you can make the best decisions possible. All right, so with that said, and with the probably 25 minutes or so that we've got remaining, I do want to jump into TRAC itself. So for anybody who has seen the tool before, this will be a bit of a refresher. For anybody who has not, we'd be happy to talk to you about it in greater detail. And there's actually a question on our survey at the end if you want to hear more about TRAC. But I will start by just kind of telling you, we're going to focus on a lot of the modules we already talked about today: IT risk assessment, business continuity management, vendor management, those sorts of things, the organizational risk assessment. But I do want to point out that on the left-hand side of the screen, you will see all the different modules that make up TRAC. So in addition to the ones that we're going to discuss and show you how they work together and things like that, we have all kinds of other modules that are built to help you in different ways, including things like employee access reviews, which is our latest module that we launched. We've got auditing, we've got compliance risk assessments and customer risk assessments and all kinds of great things. So certainly today's conversation is going to be a little bit limited on what we can do in the tool, but if you're ever interested in learning more about some of the other modules, we'd be happy to talk about it. But let's start with kind of the highest level. So the organization-wide risk assessment, that's where I want to begin. There's obviously multiple different ways of doing this. Whether you are following the CIS benchmarks, that's one option. The NIST CSF is another one. We provide that as an option. Intrex is an option if you're an FDIC or an OCC institution. That's one that can help you understand what your frameworks. You could use that as a framework to measure yourself against. We've got the CAT, which has obviously gone away, but we still have here in TRAC. But the one I do want to highlight, because it is the one that I kind of am most fond of when it comes to this, is our CRI profile, which again is the Cyber Risk Institute. That's the replacement for the CAT that is built specifically for financial institutions. But the idea behind this is pretty simple, right? You evaluate yourself on from a size and complexity perspective before jumping into the actual assessment itself. And as we talked about up at the top, whereas some of our risk assessments, like the IT module that we're about to get to in a moment, are much more quantitative. They're going to get much more granular and more formulas and calculations and actual numbers. something like the CRI profile is built to be more anecdotal. It's built to be more based off of experience and instinct and conversations and things like that. So, you know, nothing that you probably already haven't seen, but we do have the 7 different functions that make up the CRI profile: govern, identify, protect, detect, respond, recover, and extend. For those of you who are not familiar with the CRI profile, extend does deal specifically with vendor management. So again, that's where some of that information can start to really come into play together. You know, the information that you're getting out of your vendor management module or your vendor management program will help you answer some of these questions to see how you measure up as well. But from there, it's just a matter of going through and answering different, subject matter, different statements in different subject matter areas. So if we talk about our risk mitigation strategy, for instance, we're going to say, is the technology and cybersecurity risk management strategies and frameworks, are they approved by the governing authority, whether that's the board or a committee, and incorporated in the business strategy and enterprise risk management framework? We would come in here and respond to this, right? Anything from yes, this is happening, to no, it's not, to partially, we're kind of doing it, to yes, risk-based, which is, some of the strategies and frameworks we're doing this for, but not all of them. We're just doing it based off of the risk they represent. Or the final answer that you have an option for, which is yes, compensating controls, or hey, we're doing this, we're just doing it differently. We're not doing it exactly to the letter of the law that you said there. In TRAC here, we do have the ability to add rationale, the ability to come in and say, okay, yes, we answered yes, risk-based to this particular answer or to this particular statement. And here's what that means to us. Here's how we're handling it. We do allow you to add supporting evidence, so documentation. And if you're not sure what evidence you might want to add, the CRI profile does add an area for examples of effective evidence for every single statement. So in this case, maybe I want to add my technology and cybersecurity risk management strategies and frameworks, including the evidence of approval by the board, or maybe relevant board and committee meeting minutes or something like that. So if you're at a loss for how you might want to back up your response, the CRI profile can help there. It also offers response guidance. So if you're not sure what the statement's even getting at, we can help there. And then finally, we have the ability to see tags and things like that. But again, all of this is in service of getting an organization-wide risk assessment that really is built to help you understand how you measure against a particular framework, which is, not exactly the same as like an IT risk assessment that we're about to get into that's really granular and gets at each individual asset, but is also important because it kind of acts as a bit of a North Star for you. So we do have, the ability for you to see what impact tier you're in, which again, for those of you familiar with the CRI profile, there are 4 impact tiers depending upon your size and complexity, how much risk you're mitigating in each of those areas, where your responses fall, all those different sorts of things that are built to help you, again, get a better sense for how do we plug this hole? How do we fill this gap, right? If we're not doing a certain, if we're not able to respond yes to a particular statement, maybe that's an area we need to focus on, right? So we can give you data like, what does your risk mitigation percentage look like in each of those different function areas? And for me, it's pretty easy to tell. My respond section is where I need to do some work. I've got 5 partials. Maybe I need to turn some of those into yeses. So again, having that work here, great reporting, all of it kind of in one spot so you can catalog it all together. From the organizational risk assessment, I do want to pivot toward the IT risk assessment because as I said way earlier on here, we consider this to be the backbone of TRAC as well as the backbone of a good information security program. If you don't get this right, it's really, really difficult to get everything else right. So your IT risk assessment is going to be a review of your assets, anything that stores, transmits, processes data, where we identify the threats that are out there, the controls you have in place, and we run good reporting that tells you where your gaps are. So if I were to pick something like my remote consumer capture here, that's going to take us inside and TRAC. You're going to see 3 steps here: details, threats, and controls. The details is where we actually allow you to pick the asset type you want to include. And this is where some of that predefined data starts to come into play. So as a refresher, if you're using a spreadsheet, you're starting from scratch. You're on your own, right? You're having to come up with the data, basically out of whole cloth. Here in TRAC, because we're spending all that time, our team of experts is spending all that time coming up with that data, we can predefine that for you. So when it comes to picking an asset, we have about 180 to 190 different assets that you might work with here in the tool ready for you to use right out of the gate. Once you've selected the asset type, in this case, I'm picking my remote consumer capture, we provide what's called a protection profile, which is based off of 4 pieces of data: confidentiality, or how important is it the information stored, transmitted, or processed by the asset? How important is it that information remains confidential? Integrity is how important it is that information remains accurate. Availability is how important it is that information remains available to you. And then finally, what we call volume is how much information is stored, transmitted, or processed by that particular asset. It acts as a bit of a nice tiebreaker, right? If we have 2 assets that are high for confidentiality, integrity, and availability, but one of them has a ton of information that's stored, transmitted, or processed, and the other has almost none, that's going to help us understand which one might be riskiest. And that's what we're driving at with what we call our protection profile score. Every asset gets one on a scale of 4, which would be a low for all 4 categories, up to 12, which would be a high for all 4. But that number is what drives all the information that you're going to see that as we're going through this. I do want to point out on the right-hand side, because this is going to come into play when we look at other modules, the ability to link your assets to business processes. That's going to help with our BIA. And you have the ability to link to vendors as well. So again, all of this working together. It's not a siloed approach. It's not our IT risk assessments over here and vendor management's over there and business continuity somewhere else, and those things never touch one another. The concept is pulling it all together to have all of it working, so you're not duplicating effort, but you are getting a full picture of your risk overall. And you're going to see that more as we look at the other modules. The threats are pretty simple. This is where we're going to predefine a list of threats that could potentially occur to the asset and cause harm. We give you a complete listing of threats on the left-hand side of the screen. We give you definitions of the threats if you need more information. We also give you an impact and a probability score. Impact being on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being devastating, or how bad would it be if this threat occurred to this asset. Probability being on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being most likely to occur if we had no controls in place whatsoever. All of this here in TRAC, and again, in other tools, I presume, predefined based off of the asset you're looking at. All of it is customizable. You are able to add threats, change impacts, change probabilities. That is completely up to you. But we find that our customers do not ever really have to touch this screen at all. Because again, we are updating it fairly often, about once every 3 weeks or so. And that does include content changes. So once we've identified the threats in our IT risk assessment, we have to talk about the controls we have in place to mitigate those threats. And that's the controls tab, which is more of the same. We're going to customize a list of controls for you specific to the asset you're looking at. Every control gets a definition as well as standards mapping. Every control is also weighted by risk mitigation percentage. Stands to reason, right? Not every single control is as valuable as the next. Well, here in TRAC, we're going to help with that. Rather than just say, here's the control, take it or leave it, because we're doing all that work in the background, we are able to tell you essentially how effective this control will be at mitigating risk for this particular asset. And out of a lot of the different things we're going to talk about here as we're going through the tool, that's one of those that I say, if I were a financial institution and I had everything else that was going on a day-to-day basis, I probably can do an IT risk assessment when I have time. How I would actually measure each individual control and really understand how valuable and effective it is, that seems like it might be a bridge too far in some cases. So I really do like that aspect of it. And then finally, we do have where your work comes into play in the TRAC tool, the 2 columns, implemented and plan change. Implemented is straightforward, yes or no, do we have these controls in place right now? Plan change is no, we do not, but we will in the future. So in our reports in TRAC, we actually can give you inherent risk score for each asset, no controls at all, residual risk score based off the implemented column, or what does your risk look like right now? But we can also give you a future risk score as well. That would be implemented plus planned, or what does our risk look like in the future if we do what we say we're going to do on top of what we're already doing. So taking a look at reports really quickly, you can see that we have things like an executive overview, right? How do we get this out of a spreadsheet? Probably takes a lot of manual effort. TRAC, it takes the click of a button. We have our risk assessment. So this is where we can see each individual asset. We can see the inherent risk score for that asset, so no controls whatsoever. We can also see the residual risk score, or with the controls we have in place, what will our risk look like, or what does our risk look like currently? We also can give you a percent mitigated of risk, so how much risk are you currently mitigating, and you are able to set risk mitigation goals here in TRAC as well. So not only are we going to help you understand, just like a spreadsheet would, right? Okay, the data is all mapped, it's all in one spot, it's nice, it's pretty, you didn't have to come up with it, that's all great. But now how do we drive that decision making? Where are our strengths? Where are our weaknesses? Where do we need to add additional resources so that we feel comfortable with where we are? And I'm going to show you a little bit more about that in just a moment. My favorite report in TRAC is actually this one. It's our risk mitigation report, where it puts current and future status right next to one another. But these three columns are what I like so much. Risk mitigated is where you are, how much risk you're currently mitigating for the asset. Risk mitigation goal is where you want to get to, what you need to, what we've set our goal at and what we've all agreed upon. And then risk mitigation needed would be how much risk do we need to mitigate to get there. So again, that's where you can start to really see, where do I need to put my limited resources, right? Where are they going to go the furthest? And for me, that's probably my firewall, right? This one we just added earlier in the demo and didn't get a chance to add any controls yet. But if I start to look at this one right here, you can see I'm at 14% risk mitigation needed to get to my goal. Now, I love this report, but I like it even better when I pull it in Excel, which I can do in TRAC, where I can actually do some fun stuff with it. I can actually delete some of the columns that might clutter it up a little bit. So maybe I get rid of the future stuff. Maybe I even get rid of the raw numbers, right? If I'm a board member, do I necessarily care what the raw numbers look like? Maybe, maybe not. But what I do like to do here is say, okay, anything over 10% risk mitigation needed, I'm going to highlight in red. Anything between 0 and 10, or 0 and 9 rather, we're going to highlight in yellow. And everything that's already meeting its goal, I'm going to highlight in green. Doesn't get a lot easier than this, right? I hand it to somebody, red's bad, we need to work on it. Yellow's okay. Green, we're already good to go. So much, much easier than dealing with a spreadsheet you're having to build for yourself. We can actually pull it directly in there for you if for some reason you do find yourself missing spreadsheets. So our IT risk assessment on its own is a great module built to help you risk assess your assets. But where it really shines is when we start to combine it with the other pieces, right? So let's talk business continuity. Now, our business continuity management module comes in with a bunch of different great stuff. I'm going to focus on the risk assessment side, but we do have an entire documentation section where you can store policies and procedures and use our templates and things like that. We have a planned testing section where you can build out your testing program and create tests. And then finally, we have call trees for communications purposes. But the risk assessment is really where it's the most important part to me, because this is where I can develop both my business impact analysis, which again is the roadmap for getting me up and running again, as well as my risk assessment. And it's going to actually follow a lot of the same workflow that you just saw when we were looking at the IT module. 3 steps, right? Details, threats, and controls. Details is all the information you've already included, as well as, all the information that we're predefining for you, rather. So again, if you pick a particular business process type, and we have a ton of them here for you, we're going to help you understand the impacts to the customer. So if this function were to fail, how would that impact your customers? Financially, how would it impact you from a financial perspective, from a legal regulatory perspective? And then what we call required recovery resources, or how many resources do you have to put in place to get it back up and running again? All of that's predefined for you. We also give you those pesky timeframes that everybody's having to come up with, right? Recovery point objective. How far back are we backed up? If this failed tomorrow, where would I have to start from? How much data would I have lost? Recovery time objective. What's your goal? How quickly do you want to be back up and running? And then finally, maximum allowable downtime. How long can we allow it to be down before it has to be back up and running, or it would cause significant damage to the institution? So all of that is predefined for you from our team of experts. All of it's customizable. But where, again, all of this really starts to play together is in the dependency side of things, where we look at dependent processes, IT assets, and vendors. The dependent processes are which other processes or functions can I not have restored until this is back up and running again. So payroll is probably not the greatest example to use here, but you could say, if this function were to fail, I can't have any of this stuff. So that's going to factor into your BIA as well. Which other functions or processes are dependent upon this one to be operational? IT assets is where that integration starts to really flourish. That's where you're going to see all of your IT assets come over from the IT risk module, And you can tell TRAC, these are the systems or assets I would need to have operational for this to be working, and or the ones I would use to get it working again. And generally, there's a lot of overlap there. But again, you can start to see how all this starts to play together. Vendors works the same way. If I have my vendor management module in TRAC and my vendors are in here, I can tell the tool and my BIA, as I'm creating it, these are the vendors I would need to have in place for this function to be operational, and or they are the vendors that I would work with to get it back up and running again. And you can pick as many as you want. All of that will factor into your BIA that we'll look at in just a moment, but all of that works together to give you the most accurate BIA possible. If you didn't have your IT assets in there, if you didn't have your vendors in there, all of it working together, you're not getting an accurate BIA in most cases. From there, we also pivot to a risk assessment as well. So just like we did with IT, we're going to risk assess each individual function or process by identifying the threats that could cause harm to that process or function, how bad it would be if it happened. So each threat gets an impact score and a probability score. And then we identify the controls we have in place to mitigate those threats as well. Implement it as straightforward again, yes or no, do you have this control in place? Plan changes, no, but we will in the future. So again, we're also giving you a risk assessment of your business continuity processes and functions. So pulling those reports up, this is the one I want to highlight. This is our BIA, our business impact analysis. And this is where we see those work together, right? So we have the business function. We have the number of dependencies, which factors in both your IT assets and your vendor management. We have the impacts and we have the timeframes, almost all of that information predefined for you. And we use that in a formula to give you an overall priority ranking. So now you know, clear as day, if everything were to fail at once, this is the first thing you have to work on. This is second, this is third. You can't jump down to number 17 and start working on that if none of the other stuff is working, or else you won't be getting back up and running in the best possible way. So again, all of this built to work together, pull in your assets, pull in your vendors so that you can get a really clear understanding of how you would get back up and running if everything were to fail, or even a couple of things, right? 3 or 4 things fail. We still need to know what our priority is, and this can help you do that. In addition to the BIA, as I mentioned, we give you a risk assessment for every single process or function. So inherent residual risk score, how much risk you're mitigating. You can set goals. You do have that risk report, that risk mitigation report that I like so much as well. But I do want to point out that one really cool thing we can do with the IT risk module and BCM working together here in TRAC is that we can actually take those dependencies that you've indicated and give you an RPO, RTO, and MAD for the asset itself. So for my core, based off all the information that TRAC has calculated for me in the dependencies piece, my RPO, my recovery point objective is 24 hours, my recovery time objective is 12, and my maximum allowable downtime is 24. And that's going to be assigned automatically by the tool itself. You can also see all those dependencies laid out for you. So what are the dependencies for my item processing, my ACH processing? All that pulls into a report here too. So again, one of those things that can be really frustrating with a spreadsheet is the reporting functionality, and a tool like TRAC has that covered for you in pretty good detail. So having identified how IT and BCM work together, that falls on us to talk then about the vendor management piece and how that factors into the equation here. Vendor management in TRAC kind of helps from start to finish. We have a setup where you can build the rules of the program so that TRAC can make sure you're following your rules. Doesn't make sense to have rules if nobody follows them, but also so that it can tailor itself to your vendors going forward. One of the things we run into a lot with vendor management is, am I doing too much work on a vendor? Am I not doing enough? Sometimes you don't know until somebody gives you a slap on the wrist and tells you. Here, TRAC's going to eliminate that problem by taking your rules, looking at the risk of the vendor, and marrying those two things together. We also have a vendor selection part of the module, so you can pick vendors. And then we do have a vendor management section, which is where you would do all of your ongoing monitoring and reporting. So here in the details section of the module, you can see very similar. We have vendor types that we provide for you. I'm sorry, vendor categories rather that we provide for you. So all different kinds of vendors that you might work with. That protection profile terminology carries over here as well. So we can see based off of the confidentiality of the information stored, transmitted, or processed by the vendor, their access to customer information, the availability of the vendor, how important it is they remain available to you, and then the amount of stuff, the assets associated with the vendor, we can actually risk rate them for you right here on this screen as well. This is where you can also add your dependencies. So you can tell TRAC either in the business continuity module or here in vendor, these are the different functions or processes that this vendor would support for us. We allow you to store your vendor contacts in TRAC so that you can make sure you are finding them if you need them, right? Easier than digging through a desk drawer looking for a business card like a needle in a haystack. We also allow you as an integration here to pull your entire vendor contact list from the vendor module of TRAC directly into the business continuity module. So if you have both of them, that works nicely together as well. TRAC is a full contract management tool, so all of your contracts can be stored in one spot. We do alerting on upcoming cancellation notices that are due, on warnings for contracts that are about to renew automatically, or hey, this contract is coming up, you might need to take a look at it. All that can be done here in TRAC, so you're not kind of falling behind, getting locked into contracts with companies you don't like anymore. You're not having to worry about, wait, where are our contracts? You know, some are in the desk drawer, some are in a filing cabinet, some are on the server. All of them can be in the tool going forward. Similarly, all your documentation can be pulled into one spot as well. So you can keep, no pun intended, track of all of that in one place. But the IT risk assessment section is what I want to highlight, because this, again, is where that integration starts to come into play. If I don't have the IT risk module, in TRAC, I can create a risk assessment and upload it. That'll work. But if I'm doing all this things siloed, right? I'm doing it in different spreadsheets or Word documents or whatever the case may be, you're never going to get the level of visibility that we see here, where I'm actually pulling the risk assessment of the asset, the stuff that I'm getting from this vendor, in this case, my core and my mobile banking, is pulling directly into the vendor profile so that I can identify the inherent risk and the residual risk for every single vendor for every single asset that I get from this particular vendor. So again, just another area where a tool like TRAC, having all of it work together, can give you a much more comprehensive view of, in this case, my vendors, right? If I'm doing an overall vendor risk assessment, which we actually allow you to do as well, that's not going to give me the full picture without knowing how risky the stuff is I get from that vendor as well. Here in TRAC, we also give you question sets, an ungodly number of them. You're welcome to use our question sets, edit our question sets, create your own. However you want to do, that's up to you. You can do your due diligence right here in TRAC. So review those questions and assign ratings to the comfort level or confidence you have in them. Contract review works the same way. And all of that does give you an overall risk assessment of the vendor as well. So you are getting two risk assessments here with the vendor module and the IT risk module. The risk assessment of the stuff you get from the vendor and the risk assessment of the vendor overall. And then when it comes to reporting, vendor works very similarly. Lots of great reporting here in TRAC, including an overview that will tell you how many vendors you have, where they fall in your different levels, any vendors that you're keeping a closer eye on, your watch list, vendors that are not meeting your risk mitigation goals. So these are the ones you might want to keep a closer eye on, your most inherently risky vendors and your most residually risky vendors. We also have the ability to track them from a level perspective. So which level 1 vendors do I have? Level 2, level 3? Are they IT related? When were they last approved? When are they scheduled for review? Do I have any contracts I have to worry about? Here's where you'll be able to see the risk mitigation for the vendor. So how much risk am I mitigating on a vendor by vendor perspective? And then contract management as well. We've got all kinds of reports in vendor management that deal with individual vendors, groups of vendors, all your vendors, all of it built to help you understand what your full vendor management program structure looks like, as well as the risks posed by each of your individual vendors. The last module I'll touch on really quickly, because it kind of attacks the last piece that we talked about, is your ISP. And we do have an entire documentation module for that as well, which allows you to store your policies and procedures and all the different things that make up your information security program. We have templates you can use, things like that. But where that ties in really nicely is back in our IT risk module, where if I have both of those, in addition to telling TRAC that I have a control in place, I can also map that control to a policy or procedure. So if I want to come in here and say, hey, we do have an incident response program, here's where it shows up in our documentation, you can actually do that, tying those two things together and pulling reporting that says, yes, we have this control, here's where it shows up. So another area where having a tool like this and having it all in one spot, living and breathing together in one ecosystem, can pull all of it together. And again, complete that puzzle for you. give you a full picture of what your risk looks like overall from a vendor perspective, a business continuity perspective, an IT risk perspective, and then even more broadly from an organization perspective as well. So lots of great stuff in here, and we only really hit the high level stuff, the core modules that we call them. But if you're ever interested in taking a closer look at it, we'd be happy to do that with you. As we start to wrap things up today, I just want to tell you again, we really believe having all this stuff works together, having all this stuff in one spot, having all of it work together, getting all the benefits of a tool like TRAC, all the predefined data, all the great reporting, the dynamic data that's being updated so you don't have to worry about it, the consistency, all those different things we talked about really can help you at the end of the day understand your risk overall so that you can understand where your gaps are, you can understand what you need to do to fix those, and you can stand behind your information security program with a lot more confidence when it comes to an examination or an incident of some sort. All right, I've talked to you much longer than I typically do on these, so I appreciate you listening to me. Again, we do have a quick survey. If you want to get more information about TRAC, feel free to reach out to me directly. My contact information is on the screen here, or you can fill out that survey. We also would be happy to send you a copy of the slide deck as well as a copy of the recording if you request that. As always, thank you so much for joining us. I know that your time is valuable, and we appreciate you spending some of it with us. If there's anything we can do to help, please do let us know. Otherwise, I do hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much.